Coming up, it is preseason game number 2 for your New York Football Giants. We talk about getting reps from the starters, even if it's only 3. We're going to dive into what we want to see from Daniel Jones, other key members of the offensive line included in that group, and then switching over to defense. It looks like there is a growing trend for how Wink Martindale is going to utilize this secondary. What are our expectations? What can we glean? And what do we think this can tell us about the 53-man roster? We dive in coming up next, live on YouTube. Yes, my friends. It is, of course, OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your hosts over here out of Marlborough, breaking down the Brooklyn Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast, and your New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast. Joined as always by the generational season ticket holder, the healthy, the wealthy, the wise, the man in attendance tonight, Mr. Andrew Makowitz. How are we, sir?
I mean, I'm feeling good. I haven't gone to a preseason game in a couple of years, Adam. So, I'm throwing on the jersey because it'll be my son's first time being able to see the Giants. Being a 3-year-old, I want him to feel some sense of community. But yeah, wearing a jersey to a preseason game feels a little awkward, right? Because it's kind of like the rehearsal before the actual thing. It's like wearing your wedding gown during the rehearsal dinner. Like, it doesn't really make sense, does it?
You could have said tux, but that's,
whatever your reference. I'm not discriminating here, okay?
Yeah, no, that's true. It goes either way. Yeah, you need like the non-contact pads. Do you have a hat that also has like the extra padding around the dome, right? Really building it out for you. Just so
I should have gotten a Daniel Jones red jersey so that everyone knows there's no contact. Like,
contact, baby.
We're just going through this, so.
No contact for Andrew Makowitz at the game tonight. Yeah, welcome to everybody. Obviously, we said doing it live for the first time in a while. Actually, we'll do more of these, obviously, as we get into the regular season. We have a lot of things we're going to talk to, but Jay Beast, Cy Guy Bry, Tommy, some familiar faces in the conversation. So welcome, friends. We always like to have everybody in here and getting into it. And there was already a question that we'll get to for the thumbnail for this, which did include one Darian Beavers. Yes, we are still going to be talking about that narrative. But first and foremost, unlike preseason game number 1, we are going to get reps from the starters. There's a lot of things we want to watch for, including the offensive line. But we think at the highest level, Daniel Jones being out there, Darren Waller being out there, Jalen Hyatt, right? Just the sample size of what we know is going to be some of the most important offensive weapons. Isaiah Hodgins included there as well. What do you want to see? If it's 10 reps, 2 series, 1 play, what can you glean or get excited about when you're there in the stadium?
Realistically, I just want to see everyone walk off the field healthy.
He's going to go healthy.
That's number 1. Just make sure that no one gets hurt. I mean, listen, we want to see Jalen Hyatt go 60-yard deep ball vertical from Daniel Jones right away. We want to see the offensive line look sturdy. We want to see Darren Waller catch 6 passes and look like an absolute beast. All of these things would be great, Adam, but really we just want to see a little bit of consistency. We want to seem like the offense feels like it has some little bit of rhythm, even if it's 3, 6, 10 snaps that they get together. But just to see them get a little continuity together, get everyone off the field healthy, and feel good. Maybe pick up a couple first downs, maybe put some points up on the board. That's all I'm really asking for here. I assume you feel the same, right?
I do. Well, yeah, I mean, health first and foremost, obviously. That's the easy one. But also, but I will say, whatever you're going, if you're going to run a play, let me put it this way. If you're going to use the starters and you're going to run offensive plays, don't run the dump off pass. Like, you know what I mean? Like, run a real play. Just run anything you mentioned. Like, yeah, do I want to see a Jalen Hyatt 65+ yard bomb touchdown? Of course I do. But I'll also just take seeing the route combinations, right? I would like to see when Darren Waller runs something up the seam and you can kind of get a look at how things are underneath and the defensive assignments that the Carolina Panthers are going to have to pick up and how that can create some real opportunities. We talk about joint practices. We talk about, the 7-on-7s and all the drills that the Giants run. But some game action, even if it's guys that are fighting for roster spots for the Panthers as well, it just gives you a sense of how much open opportunities can we get here. And then when we go inside to the offensive line, obviously, how much time is there for Daniel Jones to drop back? Even if thinking about health, it's about drops back, shuffles left, shuffles right, doesn't see anything develop and just throws it out of bounds because he had the time to do so. We know the struggles when we look at the depth of this offensive line, but there's still questions about who's going to be the stalwart at left guard and at right guard. Continued reps for young players like obviously Andrew Thomas. He's an ace here on this line. Schmitz getting more consistent reps for him. And we heard that Evan Neal taking that step, getting out of concussion protocol. I don't know if we're going to see him tonight or not, but you just, we're getting to mid-August now. It's only a couple more weeks before we're preparing for game number 1 of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about that offensive line too, but I'm also thinking about seeing who Carolina puts out there. They obviously have a stud in Brian Burns on the outside linebacking position. They picked up Justin Houston, a veteran that I don't know if they really need to see any reps from him. They kind of know that he's a known commodity. I'm curious to see if they do put out some of their starters, Derek Brown on the defensive line, to be able to see how this offensive line holds up for the Giants. We still don't know what's going to be happening with Evan Neal. Obviously, he's still going through all the protocols and everything else. But Adam, we got to see improvement on the right side of that offensive line, specifically around right tackle, whether it's Tyree Phillips, whether it's Corey Cunningham, Wyatt Davis. I hope really doesn't see any reps at the tackle position, put him more natural at the guard position. But yeah, I just want to see some consistency. I don't want to see Daniel Jones be put in any kind of risk early on. Get in, get some reps, get the plays, get the speed down, and get out of there.
Yeah, and you mentioned even like a guy like Shaq Thompson there inside the linebacker group for Carolina, right? Maybe you're going to see some just blitz packages, some different pickup looks that are going to be asked for there, and how the offensive line handles some of those situations is probably going to dictate. I'm sure we know Brian Daboll and the coaching staff has a sense of how long they want the starters to go, but it goes both ways, right? A few strong reps, you go, okay, maybe we'll get one more series here, even if we didn't have all the production we wanted. But if all of a sudden Daniel Jones is under siege on the first or second play, see you later. Like we're all done here. Okay, Tyrod Taylor, you can go ahead out there and lead the rest of this offensive unit for the remainder of the game. You can even think about the secondary there back on the safety side for the Panthers as well, with Von Bell, Xavier Woods being some productive players. It'll be fun just to see how do these handoff assignments work and how can maybe the Giants utilize some of their speed, including Jalen White, including Darius Slayton, to really kind of stretch defenses as we think towards the season. And I think we'll touch on two here as we get through this. Any notes around, as I'm noticing Tommy talking about some of the injury updates around the roster. We'll round those out here when we get to the back end of the episode. But the other thing in terms of starting reps is going to the cornerback room. Now, last episode, we talked about what has been coming out of practice, right? And how we're seeing Adoree Jackson getting utilized in the slot. And we kind of batted it around. And I think you came to the right conclusion of, listen, it's about getting the best 3-4 players, whatever position you're looking at, the best players on the field as consistently as possible. And to this point, we haven't really mentioned any other names outside of Trey Hawkins, Adoree Jackson, and then what looks like taking some nice steps forward here in Deonte Banks. Nobody else is cementing themselves in need of reps when it comes to the cornerback room. And now over the last few days of practice, it seems like Wink and the Giants they're going this way. It is going to be Deonte Banks. It's going to be Trey Hawkins on the outside. It's going to be Adoree Jackson in the slot. You correctly pointed out that it's just about also matching up with whoever the best assignment is going to be. A lot of these matchups are actually going to be the number one threat will be out of the slot. So Adoree Jackson can match up quite well there. Are you excited about that? And how excited are you to see it tonight where you go, let me see all three of these guys on the field? And I think watch the ripple effect, right? If Adoree Jackson does his job in the slot and takes away an underneath quick option, how does that help Deonte Banks, Trey Hawkins be that much more effective on the outside?
Well, and this is what's funny, Adam, also about like the unofficial depth charts that come out for the Giants, because we had Wink Martindale share his philosophy on who's been doing well and how Micah McFadden has the inside track and they're playing Adoree Jackson on the inside and all of this different stuff. And then they re-release earlier this morning or late last night the updated unofficial depth chart.
Yeah.
And Darian Beavers is still listed, and Darnay Holmes is still listed as the one for the nickel cornerback position. So you take a lot of this with a grain of salt. I am interested to see how this works. Obviously, we were just talking about it previously. The Carolina Panthers have an interesting team where you kind of see the wide receivers. You're like, oh, Adam Thielen. Oh, Jonathan Mingo. Like one of the guys that I know that you like. There's a handful of weapons on this team that I wouldn't say are number ones, but they're certainly going to be formidable tests for rookies like Deonte Banks and for Trey Hawkins. I'm curious to see the reps that they put these guys out there, how many they'll get, how they'll look. And we know Wink Martindale is going to change this up. We know that there's going to be maybe 4, maybe there's going to be 3 safeties on the field at certain points. But really getting to see some of these guys get reps against real, number 1 and number 2 type wide receivers for the opponent is really what I'm looking out for in the first quarter.
Yeah, last note when it comes to that wide receiver group you mentioned for the Panthers there, if you watch the show, if you watch me going back to drafts past, Jonathan Mingo was a guy that I wanted the New York Football Giants to pursue. I think he had all the right skill sets and traits. Now, unfortunately, since he'll be playing against the Giants, you look at that matchup, and it's funny too, because I think Thielen falls into this category of, well, here's a veteran who has name recognition, but we don't know what's left in the tank. How effective can he be? Nice to see the way that matches up there on the outside, if it's Trey Hawkins or Deontay Banks. And then we talk about Mingo, who I think has versatility to move around the formation a lot. You want to see one of the young guys have solid reps against a player that at least we held in high regards when we were going through the draft process. So that's kind of the give and take here. And it's the weird part about falling in love with guys around the combine and the draft and then turning around going, now I kind of hope they don't look so good anymore, right? But we'll see how it unfolds. They're coming up here in a second. Let's turn our attention over to the depth chart, to the battles, to some of the things that were said in recent weeks from a defensive coach like Wink Martindale that may or may not be true now entering preseason game number 2. We dive in on those battles next. Okay, turning our attention now. Once upon a time, Micah McFadden was labeled the starter. Wink Martindale said he's doing all the right things. He's showing up in camp. We love what he's putting on tape. And now tonight, when you said the unofficial depth chart, Darian Beavers right back in the mix there to be the inside starting linebacker there alongside Okereke. I find this interesting. I feel a little bit stronger about the fact that you and I both agreed this feels like a when not if, excuse me, Darian Beavers becomes the starter. Now, do you take it the same way I do? Just because Beavers is being labeled that way, it doesn't mean that anything is dramatically shifted. It just means that now he's being given the opportunity. Now you can go and claim this spot. I believe internally the Giants like Darian Beavers. I believe they prefer him to be the starter, but he does have to earn the reps relative to what McFadden's been showing.
Well, we're also going to be talking towards the end of the show about some reinforcements outside. I don't think the Giants are fully sold on either one 100% being the starter right now, or else maybe they would be like, this guy's a starter and have some consistency behind it. I do think that they're saying, listen, we like Darian Beavers before he got hurt. We don't know how he's going to look coming off of that knee injury that he had last season. Micah McFadden's been doing all the right things in all the offseason programs, in training camp, and in the preseason where he's earned the right for someone to have to come take away that starting spot from him. Now, we're going to find that out over the course of the next couple of weeks with different reps from Beavers, with different reps from McFadden. Who's going to be the one that ends up winning out? I do think you and I both think inside the building they would prefer Beavers. If his knee looks like it's a thing of the past and he looks relatively healthy, I think we both think that he's the one that's going to win the starting inside linebacker position, though.
That's my belief, and I'd like to hear that kind of sooner than later, Jen, just because you feel like he's earned it and he's cemented there. McFadden, by the way, when you look at his skill set, again, like I just like him in the supplemental role because you mentioned about as Wink Martindale is shifting and putting in different formations and, different number of safeties, corners, etc. I can see McFadden, who has some of that bullet straight line speed. I can see him being moved around inside of that front seven. I can see O'Shane Ximines coming off the field for a rep, and maybe you just allow this guy to be doing a little bit of stand-up work where it's going to be a blitz package, but he at least has shown the ability to do that. I worry about him in coverage, right? We kind of had that comparison of thinking about him in the vein of a Blake Martinez, where yes, you do certain things very well, and we hope that McFadden gets to that point. But the other areas are where it can raise some real flags. And for McFadden, it comes down to, I think, hip quickness and being able to turn and get upfield and ultimately play recognition over just athleticism that he seems to certainly showcase. The other thing for me then, real quick note here, before we talk about some outside stuff, is Joe Shane was talking at the Giants camp the other day, and he was mentioning how coming from year 1 to year 2, areas they tried to fix desperately, defensive line depth. We want to improve that. We want to get better. They want to get deep there, but we just couldn't do it. Right. And we talk about how Glowinski was the big splash last year at that price point because he just didn't have the freedom to go and get guys. Anthony Barr's unofficial visit has happened there at the inside linebacker room as well. And he's a bit of a bigger guy in terms of body size. But when I look at that defensive front, Dexter Lawrence, we get it, right? Leonard Williams, we get it. Bringing in Robinson, we get it. But the depth there to me is still very much in question here. You've had guys that have had injuries in camp. You have players that have shown up a little bit. Riley had some nice plays last preseason game. Mixed bag, though. DJ Davidson, a young player drafted by this regime. It seems like he could be on the way out just based on injuries and not being able to be healthy. I still find that to be a really big point of emphasis here, that watching everybody after the starting reps remains a key point of emphasis all throughout these preseason games.
Yeah, you mentioned Jordan Riley. He's going to be someone that I'm really looking forward to watching more. Obviously, he played well in the first game. There's been excitement around him. Jordan Riley, crazy enough, has bounced around in college. Was started at North Carolina, then went to community college. Was at Nebraska for a cup of coffee, and then ultimately went to Oregon. But
Right.
he was a 3-star prospect and one of the best players in his state. He's kind of bounced around, but he's put on that size and strength. I'd really like to see more, and whether or not the Giants got kind of one of those diamonds in the rough with a 7th-round pick, I'm going to kind of have my eyes on him. We already know what the experienced first and second team guys are on the defensive front. I would love to see a lot of positive reps from Jordan Riley. He's definitely someone I'm going to be keeping my eye on.
Anybody else there inside of the defensive unit that you're looking at from a position battle standpoint? I don't want to retread. We know we talk about Darnay Holmes and all the backups there at the cornerback room, but I mean, listen, I don't know. Maybe it's just a world where we're waiting for cuts to happen around the league, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more here. But it just doesn't seem like the in-house options are anything to get excited about, other than the fact that, yes, Darnay Holmes has NFL-level experience, and he's been out there on the field. I think watching Dane Belton again becomes fun because that gives Wink Martindale a little bit more flexibility there. A guy that we've talked about last episode in Xavier McKinney and saying some of the injuries didn't have as a productive year last year, but we know actually that he's a very versatile player. So if all of a sudden you like what Dane Belton shows you and Pinnock's been showing up all camp long, well, Xavier McKinney is a little bit of a movable piece there in the secondary. He can go and pick up assignments covering guys in coverage, obviously. So some of these things actually become about how good do some starters look, how productive do we think and versatile do we think they can be. But is there any other spots that you're watching, either side of the ball, by the way?
Yeah, I mean, look, what I'm looking for from this game is anyone that had solid positive game ones, let's reinforce that. So that's where I kind of
Sure.
look to Jordan Riley and say that would be a good area. And then there's the flip side of it. Anyone that really underwhelmed or you're like, yikes, is that an aberration or is this like kind of where we're at with this player? Names that come to mind are Wyatt Davis, obviously was playing a little outside of position, but he didn't look great. Shout out to Tommy for mentioning before Corey. Who do you say
Phillips.
was? Oh, Tyree Phillips is still out with a little bit of an injury, dinged up. Wasn't sure if he was going to play. The other positions that I'm looking at are other guys that underwhelmed, like Cam Brown, for instance, is another guy didn't look great. The guy that I always like to tout, Rodarius Williams. I'd like to see them turn the corner a little bit, even if it's against second and third string guys. Let's see if our depth is there, or if we are going to go out and have to make some critical, decisions and look to other teams, towards cut day, and whether or not we're going to improve our depth that way.
Yeah, and I think my last thing would be on the offensive side, wanting to bounce back from the starting offensive line, knowing that Saquon Barkley is going to be, I don't know, in an ISO chamber somewhere. He's like Han Solo, and we'll just de-thaw him when we need him. We mentioned about Gray, and the reactions to some of the performances from the running game was underwhelming, but we always know it comes back to the thing about one of the greatest running backs we've seen, Saquon Barkley, and having to dodge 9 guys in the backfield in the past few seasons to be able to get himself a 2-yard gain, right? If the offensive line holds up well, then I'd love to see Gray. I'd love to see more Jashawn Corbin, who had one big break-off run, but not a lot of production in the running game after you get those starter reps. I actually think looking to that is going to be really nice to do. And the other one for me in the tight end room, we know we believe in Darren Waller. We believe in the development of Daniel Bellinger. Lawrence Cager becomes this other guy. And it's funny, these things all work in tandem. If the offensive line doesn't look like it's holding up, then you have to think about how are you going to keep in some extra bodies to help protection on any side of the line, keep Daniel Jones upright during the season. So everything builds out from the offensive line. And then you can start to think about the athleticism, the explosiveness that these weapons can bring.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And what I think we're going to see with those second and third strings, if we need to bring in reinforcements, and that's when we start
Yes.
talking about some of the news and notes that are specifically Giant related with Anthony Barr, but maybe a couple of bigger names or key names that maybe Giants have batted around a little bit, Adam, that are out there. And maybe you and I can talk a little bit more about are any of these really viable options for the Giants?
Yeah, a reminder here as we think about the 53-man roster, unlike years past, starting this season, August 29th, that's it. That's when you cut down to 53. So it gives teams a lot longer of a runway to look at the guys they have in-house. Now, it becomes interesting without those staples of when you have to cut down. It also changes when other teams start making cuts and putting bodies onto the market. So let's just start there. Before we even talk specifics, do you think that it's likely that we see a flurry of moves for the Giants when it comes to that 29th cut down day? They clear out a bunch of guys, but could you actually see them maybe getting down to 51, 50, no, an immediate pickups of, hey, we have 2-3 targeted players that as soon as we think they could drop, we're going to make upgrades at key spots.
I do. I don't think that the 53-man roster is set in stone with the players that are here today. I think that there are fringe guys at a few key positions where once cuts come down from other teams, the Giants could look to improve the roster. We talked about offensive line. We've talked about cornerback position. We've talked about the inside linebacker position. All of those areas, I think Dan Duggan even mentioned a few of those. Cornerback is one of them that Dan Duggan has said, be on the lookout. Even Joe Shane admitted it. He said, we're already looking at 1-for-1 type trades that are on the market where, hey, this might be a fringe guy for us, might be a fringe guy for you. Maybe a change of scenery can spark something for one of them, or else we're going to get, nothing for a player that may have some promise for someone else.
And I actually think that's maybe that's a part of the tweak here too now, right? Without the cuts happening, that more teams will engage in these one-to-one depth trades that you normally wouldn't think of, right? Flurry of guys get cut, flurry of guys get picked up. Now maybe you do, just like that, say, yeah, we could use a little depth at cornerback. You could lose a little depth. It's hard for me to think of a wide receiver. That becomes the obvious one, right? Giants have a lot of wide receiver depth. Hey, these guys are all looking pretty good. What do you think about a Cole Beasley? What do you think about, can't say Colin Johnson now that he's been dinged up, but, David Sills, even anybody that shows up over one of these couple of preseason games, maybe you get to cut a deal with someone and improve another area. Let's talk about a couple of outside guys, realistic, unrealistic, but it informs just this team, right? We've been saying it all day long, all week long, all season long for years. The offensive line, cementing it. If nobody shows up, Jason Peters, this is your take the lead, Andy. A guy that's averaged about 500 reps per season since 2017, ups and downs in terms of injuries, highly productive guy. The PFF grade tells you it's good. Just knowing him as a player and watching him tells you that he's good. 14 sacks, though, not including this past season where he only had a couple hundred reps and had injuries. 2020 and 2021 seasons, 6 and 8 sacks surrendered, respectively. 20th year, I think it is, that he'd be playing in the NFL, excuse me. Would you prefer an option like this if it were on the table over one of these young guys that has the ups and downs, but we could be talking about youth versus the slow decline of age?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's no mystery that Jason Peters is 41 years old. He looked slow. He's given up a bunch of sacks, sure. But when you say behind Evan Neal and Andrew Thomas, would you say that any of the other tackles that are on the roster right now, if Andrew Thomas were to go down, that you'd feel okay, like we still have a shot to win the game? Like for me, I look at it like, listen, we know what Jason Peters is going to be. He's not going to morph into something else. He's not going to be here long term. That's not necessarily what he's going to be. But if the depth doesn't look good again tonight, Adam, I kind of think that it would make sense as a swing tackle, as a backup tackle, to say at least there's an experienced guy, former Pro Bowler, that at least can step in for a game or two to be able to help the Giants win. And that's kind of where my mind goes with Jason Peters.
So that's my. It's fun. I look at all these guys the same way, including Jason Peters, as well. What if Andrew Thomas, he needs to relace his shoe, retape something up, and is going to miss 4 or 5 plays? I might feel more comfortable saying, hey, Jason Peters, get out there. You're a veteran. You're experienced. We're going to run plays that make a lot of sense. Whereas say it was Matt Pert gets plugged in. Well, you don't even know. You could try to run the most basic of plays that are going to work out for him, and it could still be a disaster. I like all these guys in that mold in terms of what I'm trying to fill. If you tell me that Andrew Thomas goes down for 2 games, if anybody goes down for a couple of games, and you got to bring in Jason Peters or others, I just don't have confidence in that right now because that type of production is not out there on the open market. This, to me, falls far closer to being like, what is the trade category here where a team has a clear established stud and maybe a couple of guys that are vying for some swing tackle options and you go and get them. By the way, I'm not against it. If you told me that Jason Peters was on the roster right now, I'd feel more confident in a swing tackle option like that than I do about anybody else they have. But I just don't know what level that rises, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's a weird situation. We're basically saying, like, if in case of emergency break glass, like, would you rather have Jason Peters or not have him? I think the answer is you'd rather have him, but still, that would be a terrible position for us to be in.
Speaking of injuries, the New York Football Giants are no stranger to that, and the wide receiver room is littered with that in a lot of ways too. Obviously highlighted by Sterling Shepard, who, by the way, says he wants to retire with the New York Football Giants. Hopefully, it's a productive year, and I believe you said this over on Twitter. Hopefully, that's 2 years from now, not 2 weeks from now, right? There, when that road comes to an end for him, could be interesting. But a recent cut for the Detroit Lions due to injury and to someone who's shown flashes but never lived up to the hype of his draft stock, Used to play in the same stadium, as a matter of fact, for the New York Jets. That's one Denzel Mims, 676 yards on 42 catches, 92 targets, I think, over the last 3 seasons, just 15 starts in those 3 seasons. We know, right? Could not get into the good graces, could not get on the same page. Seems to be a productive player when capable of being given the opportunities, and those little glimmers have been shown here. When you think about the Giants in that depth chart, how many guys in a very deep wide receiver room would you say it's worth taking a flyer on a player like Mims at his age with the potential? How many guys do you shuffle him ahead of in the Giants wide receiver room?
So here's the tough thing, without going too crazy into the Jets, like it
Sure.
doesn't seem outside of Garrett Wilson that the Jets have figured out a lot of the wide receiver skill positions. You look at signing Corey Davis to a long term deal. You look at Denzel Mims getting drafted, never being used. Look at Elijah Moore, who is now on the Cleveland Browns, and nothing but positive things are coming out
Sure.
about Elijah Moore and his play. So it's tough. Obviously, there was a conditional draft pick associated with Mims going to the Detroit Lions. The
Yep.
injury kind of made it easy for them to say, you know what, it's not worth us doing this and rehabbing it and having to give up draft compensation for it. I've always been a fan of bringing him in if it doesn't really cost the organization anything. I'm kind of in that boat, but I don't know. With as many wide receivers as we have on this roster, it's really tough for me to say bring in another one, which spreads the reps out even further. And Adam, just a random fact for you. Did you know that Colin Johnson is younger than Denzel Mims? So, like, when we think about
Yep.
age, it's like he's already been in the building. He's been here a couple years. He's been in Daboll's system. If he can stay healthy, give me Colin Johnson over Denzel Mims because he has some consistency within the organization.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned him because I think it falls in the same category. And this is going to be true of maybe a lot of wide receivers that we would talk about in terms of the back end here. And this really, for me, comes down to, okay, Isaiah Hodgins, Darius Slayton, Paris Campbell. Right. Jalen Hyatt, if healthy, Sterling Shepard, Wan'Dale Robinson waiting to come back from his as well. We know that Cole Beasley and Jamison Crowder are these safety valve options. If I can see health at the top end of the roster, well, then I could look at even David Sills, who's, I think, a low-level fan favorite, though he lives on the practice squad for most of his career. Beasley, Crowder, Sills, Mickens, Khalil Pimpleton, who I'm a fan of, and like Colin Johnson. Like, those guys are all in the same category. I think you bring up a really good point just around who's been in the building. Colin Johnson, even if he's struggling with some injuries, okay, we can wait for him to come back and be productive. But I always want to take a shot. It's why I liked when they picked up Khalil Pimpleton. I don't know if he'll ever be anything. But if you're showing me that Cole Beasley and Jamison Crowder can have this functionality, then a young player can learn and grow that. Likewise on the outside. If you're showing me that Isaiah Hodgins can be picked up off the practice squad for Buffalo and be productive, well, maybe Denzel Mims can be too, right? To your point about the Jets, well, all we know about Brian Daboll and about Mike Kafka is they always find ways to be productive with players, right? So taking a flyer on a guy like that would make sense. I think at some point a numbers game would happen here where you say, what are we taking a flyer on, right? I actually think a team like the Patriots would be the perfect team for a guy like Denzel Mims to go to, right? Where you just feel like, oh, given the opportunity, get on the field, very specific role, all of a sudden some big catches come for you. But it just comes down to depth here for me. And then, by the way, this is true, I think, as we'll round out this episode. When it comes to what we're looking to pick up, there's a lot of areas. Linebacker depth, cornerback depth, offensive line depth, right? There's a lot of areas of need that are going to come up way before I would think about, oh, flyer on a young wide receiver. That's going to take me a while to get to when I think about what the Giants do.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if you told me that we were going to trade away Jamison Crowder for a late round pick and bring in Denzel Mims, and we bring up we get some draft
Right.
capital and we supplement it with younger people in the building, sure, I'm all on board with that. But you're talking about guys that are kind of battling around the fringe anyway. Like, do you see a world where the Giants pick up Denzel Mims and in a week and a half they're going to cut Cole Beasley, Jamison Crowder, Colin Johnson, and David Sills to put him on the roster? Like,
Right.
that to me is the hardest part. If this was a move that's made 2 months ago, maybe he has an opportunity. But right now, we already have so many different options that we need to figure out who's going to be on this roster that it probably just doesn't make sense timing-wise for the Giants.
Let alone the fact that Darren Waller could be lining up outside. I mentioned Lawrence Cager earlier could be on the outside, right? Like, even the tight ends are wide receivers in model and mold. So very deep there. At the end of the day, Andrew Mackowitz is going to be at this game. He's going to be cheering it on. He's going to be giving Little Rory his first taste of Big Blue. Who is the guy that when we come in and talk about this game next week, who are we going to be saying? Who's your breakout guy that shows you something? Could be a starter, could be a depth player. Who do you think you come in you're most excited to talk about?
On the defensive side of the ball, I mentioned Jordan Riley. He's the name that I'm circling because I think he'll get enough reps to make a big impact on the game. So
Yeah.
that's where I'm kind of going with that. Depends how long the starters get, Adam. Like, I just don't know how many reps they're going to get, which makes it tougher. You're going to have a guy like David Sills that probably is going to be out there for quite a bit of time. But really, I mean, let's all hope and pray that we get a deep ball to Jalen Hyatt over the top. Like, take one shot for me.
One
Like,
time, baby.
let's see if we could see that speed in MetLife Stadium on that new turf. Man, that's the one thing that I'm hoping that we get is just at least one deep ball over the top to really showcase what Jalen Hyatt could mean to this offense.
That's my offensive guy, right? Just Jalen Hyatt. Give me one ball. And by the way, do it where it's a route that he has to go ahead and shake a guy off, right? Get off the line, like show the every incremental part of a complete route with Daniel Jones, the timing and everything else that we can get excited about that. Obviously, we want to see that type of production there. Defensively, we've been talking about him a lot. I think if Darian Beavers is going to get a real chance here, like to see him put a really good foot forward and start to claim that role. And then I'll look inside. That edge rushing group here, beyond Kayvon Thibodeau, beyond Azeez Ojulari, who's going to be the player that steps up here? We talk a lot about Oshane Ximines, about Fox. I'm going to zero in on those two players and just say, hey, when you're getting a lot of reps here tonight, I need somebody that feels like they claim this role here. Not claim the role as in that's who's on the roster. Claims it as in, oh, there is a confident and dynamic playmaker here that we can use in certain doses in situational football. So I'll look at those two areas for now. We'll go ahead and come back in after this one, break down what we saw from it. Remember, just one more preseason game to go, and then it's styling up for Dallas, and we'll go ahead and be giving you some content around where we think the division is going to stand, what are going to be some other teams and players that we're excited to watch, just NFL overall. The way that you get all that information is to follow us on social media, One Giant Podcast at Andy Mack 214 at Adam Armbrecht, and wherever you get the podcast needs fulfilled. Again, a big shout out to everybody that came in here today. It was a lot of fun. Andy's going to be at the game. We appreciate it. We'll be doing more live content throughout the season like this. Until next time, though, as he heads off to game day, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.